Long before the Atlantic rose to prominence, a vast, ancient network was already dictating the flow of the world's ultimate wealth. This was not merely a trade route, it was the world's first supercomputer, calculating power and profit through the rhythm of the tides. While Europe slept in the Dark Ages, the Indian Ocean was forging a golden chain that linked empires from Rome to China. In ancient Rome, politicians panicked as their treasury was drained dry, with gold flowing east to pay for exotic luxuries they could not resist. Pliny the Elder lamented that India was the graveyard of Roman gold, absorbing 50 million sesterces every single year for mere pepper and silk. To navigate this, merchants relied on the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a secret operating manual for the ancient global economy. But unlike the chaotic land routes of the Silk Road, this maritime machine required patience. The ocean demanded you understand its one great rule. The system was not built on gold or armies, but on the wind. To master the market, you first had to master the monsoon. While land caravans were slow and vulnerable to bandits, the ocean offered a high-speed highway provided you knew exactly when to launch. This created a rhythmic pulse of commerce, a seasonal heartbeat that synchronized the economies of three continents into one massive organism. The mechanism was the monsoon winds. In summer, they blew fiercely towards India. In winter, they reversed, blowing gently back to Africa. This predictability turned the ocean into a conveyor belt. Merchants could schedule intercontinental shipments with the precision of a modern train timetable. Ships utilized these winds to carry bulk tonnage that no camel could bear: heavy timber, iron ore, and the black gold of the era, pepper. This lowered the transaction costs of trade drastically. Lower risk and higher volume meant that for the first time, common goods could travel globally. To support this, a financial layer emerged. Credit systems and promissory notes allowed a merchant in Baghdad to cash a check in Canton. Infrastructure rose to meet the winds. Lighthouses, ports, and warehouses were built, not by empires, but by independent merchant guilds seeking efficiency. The Strait of Malacca became the Great Funnel. Here, the goods of the Far East met the traders of the West in a handshake of civilizations. Timing was everything. Miss the monsoon, and you were stranded for months. This enforced a culture of hospitality in the port cities. Stranded merchants formed diaspora communities. They built stone towns and married locals, creating cosmopolitan hubs that belonged to no single nation. The mechanism was perfect. The winds provided the logistics, the merchants provided the capital, and the ocean provided the tax-free highway. The economic consequences were staggering. Small coastal states that controlled the choke points transformed into thalassocracies, empires of the sea. The Srivijaya Empire in Indonesia grew obscenely wealthy simply by taxing the ships passing through the straits, producing nothing but geography. Spices like nutmeg and cloves, found only on tiny volcanic islands, became the most valuable commodities on Earth, worth more than their weight in gold. This trade didn't just build wealth, it terraformed cultures. It changed how the world tasted, how it dressed, and how it worshipped. In Cairo and Baghdad, the middle class exploded. A merchant could amass a fortune that rivaled the nobility, threatening the old feudal orders. The balance of power shifted. The center of the global economy was not Rome or China, but the Indian Ocean itself, the great connector. On the East African coast, the Swahili city-states rose from the sand, built entirely on the profits of supplying ivory and gold to the network. This wealth funded the arts and sciences. It is no coincidence that the golden age of Islam occurred exactly where these trade routes intersected. But networks transfer everything. Along with silk and spices, these ships carried the rats that would eventually bring the Black Death to the West. Yet for centuries, the system remained stable. It was a free trade zone enforced not by a navy, but by mutual profit and the wind. This was the first true globalization. Islam traveled to Indonesia not by the sword, but on the decks of merchant ships seeking spices. Chinese porcelain has been found in the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, proving that the supply chain extended deep into the African interior. For 1,000 years, the Indian Ocean was the center of the world. Europe was merely a peripheral buyer, desperate to get closer to the source.
The immense wealth of this network is what drove the Europeans insane with envy. It is the reason they eventually jumped into the Atlantic. They wanted to cut out the middlemen. They wanted to seize the network that the monsoons had so carefully built. The Indian Ocean proved that trade is the most powerful force in history. It builds cities, spreads faiths, and creates the very concept of the modern world. But in 1498, a new shape appeared on the horizon. These ships didn't come to trade peacefully. They brought heavy cannons. Vasco da Gama had arrived, and he was about to shatter this peaceful monsoon marketplace with a violence the ocean had never seen. The era of free trade was over. The era of armed monopoly was about to begin. But how did a tiny nation like Portugal break the world? Join us next time as we dissect the violent disruption of the global order. Subscribe so you don't miss the history of power.